Okay, guys. So my name is Jay, and this is these are videos that I'm making for people who are interested in teaching, say, in the Middle East or in Korea or China, because I spent 3 years in Saudi Arabia, and I spent 12 years in Korea, and so I'm just kind of giving some ideas about for people who may be in that situation, who are thinking about going overseas. So today it's a very different environment than when I went. When I first went to Korea, we didn't have YouTube, and we didn't. The internet was just beginning, so it was hard to find out. Really didn't know anything about South Korea, but today everything is on YouTube. There's lots of teachers with teacher channels to give you advice and so on. So it's a much more different environment. And the first thing I would say about anyone who wants to teach in South Korea, there are different jobs, but it's really difficult to get the really good jobs like at the big universities um, when you first get there. Unless if you have a PhD, or maybe you have a master's in TESOL or something, you can get a job at a university. However, in the last 15 to 20 years, the price of real estate has really, really gone up in South Korea. And meanwhile, the salaries for teachers really hasn't gone up so much. So when I first got there, it was, I had friends in Japan and friends in Korea, and they said Japan's too expensive, you can't save any money. It's better to go to Korea where it's cheaper, and it was, and then travel to Japan. And now I say the same thing about China. China is much cheaper than South Korea. And the big thing about South Korea is it's the real estate nowadays is just very, very high. But if you are not familiar with Korea, what you have to know is you're probably going to end up, when you first go, you're going to end up working in what's called the Hogwan, or maybe a public school. The public schools are much better organized. They've had other teachers in there in the past, so they have a system set up. But the Hogwans, or the academies, are business driven, and that's something that a lot of people from, like, when I grew up, we didn't really have those academies because I'm from small town Canada. And when I got there, I didn't even know what it was, and I was quite surprised about the whole business side of things. And they somehow, I mean, I know how it evolved, but the other kind of problem in Korea, um, at the academies and the Hagwon, is we devised this term called edutainment. And edutainment is this thing where you kind of teach English, say, for an hour class, you might have 45 minutes of a class, and then somehow you're supposed to play games. And they'll say that they want you to try to entertain them and make class fun. Almost every boss I had said, can you try to make it fun? And I used to say, how do you make it fun? How do you make teaching any language fun? And that was something the Koreans never really. I never asked growing up in Canada, the United States, why isn't class fun? It's boring. That's part of what it is. You shouldn't be in the class if it's boring. It's not interesting to you. Um, so if you're in the Hogwans or the academies, then what you have to do, in my opinion, is start off with a chain that's established. If you have an established chain, they have students in place, they have a system in place. The brand new academies or the private academies, you just never know what's going to happen, and you may not get paid. Then you have to go to the labor board, or especially if the students. The second thing is, the other thing that I was really surprised about in Korea was, and this is true for China as well, is that the owners and the managers of the Hogwons and the academies, they're overly sensitive to the comments of every single mother. And the Koreans, when they spend their money to go to these academies, the mothers do not hesitate to call the academy and tell you something. And we used to, in the summertime, the students would be going home at, say, 4 o'clock, and they would get home. The mothers would say, "What'd you do at the academy?" And the kids would tell them, and the mothers would phone, or they would complain about a teacher. And it was amazing to me how terrified the managers were of those parents calling to say, "I don't like ABC," or "You shouldn't have done 1, 2, 3," or something along that lines. Um, it's as important to understand the culture of Korea, how it's far more obsessed with education than any other nation. In USA and Canada, the most difficult thing is to get out of university. In high school in Japan and Korea is totally obsessed with getting into the top university. And therefore, the high school kids and the middle school kids are under tremendous, tremendous pressure, and the amount they study is just ungodly. And so, those are things that you have to know before you go ahead, before you go, because those are issues that come up. And I want to recommend a book called The Geography of Thought, and I forget the writer right now, but it's a fantastic book, and I really wish I'd read it ahead of time before going to Korea because my life would have been much, much easier. Korea's changed a lot in recent years, and but there are still a lot of things that you have to be adjusted to.